Welcome students, I hope all of you have done well in your INI CET exam. Two things we have learned from this exam are number one, repetition. A lot of repetition from previous AIMS questions. This is one thing we have already stressed upon in our webinar. And number two is clear basics. Student, at this point of time, revision is the key. And number two, if you are clear in your basics, then whatever be the exam pattern, whenever is the exam, nothing will change your rank. So learning these two things from the previous INI CET, let's move on to the questions. So number one question in pathology was, which clotting factor will not affect clotting in vivo? Students, please read the question carefully. It is written, will not affect. Now let's see the explanation. Clotting in vivo means extrinsic pathway, right? This is the question we have already discussed in our crash course and is also given in the LMR last minute revision notes in our app. And we have discussed one thing, that this is a repetition question. Why? Because in previous AIMS also similar question was asked. The only difference was that they asked you the sequence of factors. The sequence of factors involved in the clotting pathway, right? But now they have asked you a little bit differently. They have asked you which of the clotting factors will not affect clotting in vivo. Now students, you often get confused that what is the first factor involved in both these pathways. So don't worry students, we are here with you. Simple mnemonic and you are sorted. Intrinsic pathway, right? The first factor to be involved is factor 12. The first factor to be involved in case of intrinsic pathway is factor 12, whereas in extrinsic pathway it is factor 7. It is factor 7 you have to remember. So how will you remember? If you remember, in class 12th you are all busy preparing for your entrance and you stay indoors. You stay inside the home. So you can remember factor 12 is intrinsic pathway. Factor 12 is intrinsic pathway. You usually stay inside in case of class 12. So easy to remember, factor 12 is involved in intrinsic pathway, whereas factor 7 is involved in extrinsic pathway. After that, this you usually remember the pathway. Factor 12 activated will activate factor 11, that will activate factor 9, and finally this is the common pathway. This is the common pathway, but let's just focus on the question. It is written, which of the clotting factors will not affect clotting in vivo, right? So what will be your answer? Factor 12. Factor 12 will not affect in vivo, right? It is in vitro. It is intrinsic pathway. And number 2 point you have to remember, that usually deficiency of factor 12 is asymptomatic. Deficiency of factor 12 is asymptomatic. So looking at these two important points, let's just focus on the question again. Okay, these were already could be ruled out. These could be easily ruled out and you would have confused in between option 9 and 12. And one point that you have to remember, that factor 12 deficiency is asymptomatic, and thus it was a better answer compared to factor 9. So what will be your answer? Which clotting factor will not affect clotting in vivo? Factor 12 will not affect clotting in vivo. Clear? Moving on to the next question. A female presents with liver metastasis. On IHC, there was seen CK20 positivity and CK7 negative. So most likely the site of primary will be, it is a very simple question students, do not be confused between CK and CD markers. It is CK, that means cytokeratin, and that means some kind of epithelial differentiation. So CK20 and 7, these are two very important markers. Do not be confused, do not be worried of these markers. We have a very simple mnemonic for you, easy to remember. This is diaphragm. Above the diaphragm, what will be positive? CK7. CK7 will be positive in the organs present above the diaphragm. What are the three most important organs they ask? Thyroid, lung, breast. They are present above the diaphragm in a human. That means which marker will be positive? CK7 or CK20? CK7. It is a smaller number, 7, and it will be present above the diaphragm. So it will be positive. CK7 will be positive, whereas CK20 will be negative in case of above the diaphragm, thyroid, lung, breast. Commonly asked question. Next, in which places CK20 positivity will be there? With CK7 negative, answer will be below the diaphragm. Below the diaphragm. So what will be there? Colorectal carcinoma. Most commonly asked, colorectal carcinoma. CK20 will be positive, whereas CK7 will be negative. Along with that, you can remember Merkel cell carcinoma as well. Next, both CK and 20 positive. Both CK and 20 positive will be present peridiaphragmatic, around the diaphragm. What are the sites? Pancreas, biliary tract and stomach. Pancreas, biliary tract and stomach. And last, both negative, CK7 and CK20 negative, LPK, liver, prostate and kidney. All of these are potent questions, but if you just remember the simple mnemonic, above the diaphragm 7 positive, below the diaphragm 20 positive, both positive, peridiaphragmatic, and in case of both negative, examples will be liver, kidney, prostate. Simple. So coming to the question, CK20 positive but CK7 negative. CK20 positive, CK7 negative. 20 is a larger number. We can remember below the diaphragm, colorectal carcinoma. GIT malignancy, most important, colorectal carcinoma. Along with that, there will be CDX1 positivity as well. But just focus on this question. CK20 positive, 7 negative, below the diaphragm, answer will be CA, colorectum as the primary site. Clear? Next. Moving on to the next question. This question is also a repeated question. Why? We have already discussed the differences between juvenile polyposis and Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, right? Now, first let me study the differences between the two. If in your question, the clinical scenario says that a 5-year-old child with involvement of which site? Rectum. With involvement of rectum along with polyposis. What will be your answer? Juvenile polyposis. Let me show you an image of juvenile polyposis. A 5-year-old child with which site involvement? Rectal involvement, and it involves polyp. You can see a polyp structure. Let me just zoom into the structure. Can you see a polyp? Can you see a polyp? Along with dilated glands, increased number of glands, some of which are highly dilated. This is juvenile polyposis seen in case of a child. Whereas Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, average age is 10 to 12 years, STK11 gene mutation, right? Autosomal dominant, most common site small intestine. It is a hematomatous polyp, right? With mucocutaneous hyperpigmentation in the buccal mucosa, and a very important feature, arborizing network which gives a typical Christmas tree appearance. Let me just show you the image. Let me just zoom into it. Can you see this arborizing network of lamina propria with smooth muscles? This shows a arborizing pattern of Christmas tree appearance, which is typical of which condition? Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, right? So let me just come to the options. Yes, it shows a arborizing pattern of smooth muscles and lamina propria, which gives a Christmas tree appearance. Commonly asked question. Either they give you this term directly or they can show you an image. Because they are focusing more on images, you have to remember all the images as well. Okay, with gene involvement, STK11, that is also a correct option. Yes, multiple hematomatous polyps. What is the site? Small intestine. So these are all the important features we have already discussed when we were discussing in a crash course, right? So is it autosomal recessive? No, it is autosomal dominant. So the question states which of the following is incorrect. It is not autosomal recessive, it is autosomal dominant. Clear? Now looking at the image again, Christmas tree appearance due to arborizing network of smooth muscles and lamina propria, which gives a Christmas tree appearance. Okay, this is Peutz-Jeghers and this is juvenile polyposis syndrome seen in case of around 5-year-old child. And what is the site of involvement? Rectum. Okay, so this is a polyp with the dilated glands, typical appearance of juvenile polyposis syndrome. Moving on to the next question. This was a tough question, students, but remember this is a potential question for NEET exam now. Rees and Eckert diluting fluid. Okay, I hope you remember that Rees and Eckert diluting fluid is used for number 1, platelets and also RBCs. Okay, now if you remember this thing, isn't it easy to remember that for Rees and Ecker diluting fluid, what pipette will be used? RBC pipette will be used. So you can easily answer RBC pipette, or they can show you various pipette images, right? They can show you various pipette images. What pipette is this? Is it RBC pipette or WBC pipette, students? Easy to remember. Okay, a very simple tip and you are sorted. If in your question you see a red bead, you can see this beaded appearance inside which a bead is there. If that is red in color, it is a RBC pipette. If it is white in color, it is a WBC pipette. Another thing you can see is the markings. The markings are not seen here, but you can check for markings. If the markings here are from 1 to 101, it is a RBC pipette. If the markings are from 1 to 101, it is a RBC pipette. And if the markings were from 1 to 11, you know WBC count is less. So the marking will also be lesser in number. Up to 11 markings, WBC pipette. Up to 101 marking, answer will be RBC pipette. So we can see the option as RBC pipette. You can see a red beaded appearance, number 1, and number 2 you can see the marking from 1 to 101. So answer will be RBC pipette, right? Next. So we will just study the important diluting fluids, Rees and Ecker fluid used for both RBC and platelet. Even if you just remember for next exam, R for Rees, R for RBC pipette. R for Rees and R for RBC pipette. Hames fluid for RBC, Dacey fluid for RBC, and Turk's fluid for WBC count. Next, which section demonstrates lipid in H&E? So answer will be, best answer will be frozen section. So you always have to remember lipid and the efficacy of frozen section in the diagnosis of lipid. Why? Because lipid can be washed off during the normal formalin fixed specimen. So better is frozen section, which will preserve the lipid. And thus, in order to see the lipid, better is a frozen section. Now, they could have asked you the best stain in order to demonstrate lipid. Answer will be, we have already done it in our crash course, answer would have been oil red O. So, do you remember the mnemonic we made for oil red O? Oil means lipid, oil means fat, so easy to remember. More specific, best stain on frozen section for lipid is oil red O. Oil you can remember, fat or lipid. So oil red O is the best stain on frozen section in order to demonstrate lipid. And how is it seen? So you can remember red in color. Lipid can be seen as red in color. So easy to remember what is the best stain? Oil red O. What is the best technique? Frozen section, because otherwise the alcohol fixative would have washed away the lipid content. Clear? So answer will be frozen section. Next, a patient has translocation 11-14. So students, not directly, they can ask you indirectly. They are talking about which lymphoma? Mantle cell lymphoma. Mantle cell lymphoma, you all must remember the translocation 11-14. Next, you have to remember what markers can be positive. So it would have been a multiple answers correct. Answer will be number 1, cyclin D1. You all must remember cyclin D1, and number 2, SOX11. If I ask you which is more specific, can you remember? S for SOX11, S for specific. So if I ask you which is a better one, SOX11 is a better one. But one very, very important point you have to remember, we have already discussed under mantle cell lymphoma. This is the table which is given in our LMR also. So CD5 positive, CD23 negative. This is a very, very important differentiating point in order to differentiate from CLL. Okay, this is also a very important question, can be asked in the next exam. CD5 positive but CD23 negative, unlike CLL which is positive for both CD5 and CD23. Next you have to remember, yes, cyclin D1 positivity But a very important marker which they are asking, in fact this is a repeat question, SOX11 is positive in case of cyclin D1 negative mantle cell lymphoma patients. So it is positive in case of cyclin D1 negative patients, and it is a beta marker. Okay, so two important markers you have to remember, cyclin D1 and SOX11. Next, you have to match the following. Number 1, silicosis. Okay, so we will see the correct options. Silicosis gives the typical crazy pavement appearance on CT scan. Crazy pavement appearance. Why is it seen? Why is it seen on CT? It is due to thickening of the intra and interlobular septa, which gives a typical ground glass opacities called as crazy pavement appearance. Is it seen only in silicosis? No, it can be seen in other conditions as well, like pneumocystis carinii, sarcoidosis, ARDS, but here they are asking about silicosis, so I will just give you a funny mnemonic, silly. So you all know silly is crazy, right? So at least in silicosis you can remember crazy pavement appearance on HRCT seen due to thickening of intralobular and interlobular septa. Number 2, okay, asbestosis we have already discussed. How will you remember that? Base, okay, base. So which is the most common site involved in asbestosis? Basal lobes. Basal lobes are much more involved in case of asbestosis. For mesothelioma, you have to remember that there is malignant pleural effusion but without mediastinal shift. This thing you must have studied in medicine as well. Malignant pleural effusion but no mediastinal shift will occur in case of mesothelioma. And last is Kaplan syndrome. What is Kaplan syndrome? It is rheumatoid arthritis with Kohl-Werker's pneumoconiosis. Okay, Kaplan syndrome. So we'll quickly match silicosis, crazy pavement appearance, Kaplan syndrome, yes, initially demonstrated in Kohl-Werker's, asbestosis, basal lobes are most frequently involved, mesothelioma, malignant pleural effusion but no mediastinal shift, right? So moving on to the next question, which of the following will have least chances of dry tap on bone marrow aspiration? So you have to rule out the options. Now, do you remember the most important examples for dry tap? Yes, aplastic anemia, I hope you remember, dry tap and bone marrow aspiration, and on bone marrow biopsy, decreased cellularity is seen, right? In case of myelofibrosis, when the bone marrow is fibrosed, there is hardly and very scanty material aspirated. So, in case of fibrosis, there is a dry tap. AML M7 is also associated with myelofibrosis and so hairy cell leukemia. So what will be the best answer out of these? Follicular lymphoma will not have least chances, no dry tap. Follicular lymphoma. And how do you usually characterize follicular lymphoma? With paratrabecular atypical lymphocytic infiltrate, right? So out of these, yes, hairy cell leukemia, AML M7, myelofibrosis, aplastic anemia, all these are examples of dry tap, and out of these options, follicular lymphoma will be your answer where there is least likely chances of dry tap. Next, MPGN is seen in. We'll quickly see the causes of MPGN. Infections like hepatitis B and C, HIV, malaria, schistosomiasis, immunological disorders like SLE, rheumatoid arthritis, inherited complement deficiency, and malignancies like CLL. If you remember the type in case of HIV, the type of nephrotic syndrome in case of HIV, you should remember FSGS, and that to the collapsing variant. Collapsing variant of FSGS you must remember in association with HIV, frequently asked question. So what will be your answer? Is it seen in HIV? Yes. SLE? Yes. Hepatitis B and C? Yes. And CLL. So in multiple answers correct, all of these would have been the answer. Right? So looking at the next question, a 23-year-old female with easy fatigability and pallor, that indicates anemia, easy fatigability and pallor, hyperpigmented knuckles. Now if in the question hyperpigmented knuckles was given, then the answer out of these will be vitamin B12 deficiency. If the image would have been koilonychia, okay, we have already seen how koilonychia looks like. It looks like a spoon shaped cavity of nails. Okay, concavity of the nails, koilonychia, which is a sign of severe iron deficiency. So if the koilonychia feature would have been shown, answer would have been iron deficiency anemia, but they have asked you hyperpigmented knuckles in an anemia patient, answer will be vitamin B12 deficiency. Answer will be vitamin B12 deficiency. Next question is most common tumor in the retroperitoneal region. So answer will be liposarcoma. If they ask you most common retroperitoneal tumor, answer will be lymphoma. But if they ask you most common retroperitoneal sarcoma, as in this question, answer will be liposarcoma. Clear? Answer will be liposarcoma. Two other things you have to remember is, number one, translocation associated with myxoid liposarcoma, it will be translocation 1216, and you have to remember another important marker, MDM2 positive in case of well differentiated liposarcoma, dedifferentiated liposarcoma and atypical lipomatous tumor. Next, a child with history of blood transfusion given at 2, 6 and 10 months. Can I say recurrent blood transfusion in a child? Or can I say the patient is transfusion dependent? And some students are saying that the hemoglobin was also given around 6 gram. So such a low hemoglobin with recurrent blood transfusion need and the features of maxillary prominence, your diagnosis will be thalassemia. Your answer would have been thalassemia. Now looking at the options for the definitive diagnosis, I will go for globin chain assay. Why not HPLC? For hemoglobin electrophoresis, it is a screening test for thalassemia. But why not HPLC, and why answer would have been globin chain assay? If the question would have been multiple answers correct, both C and D would have been correct. In case of multiple answers correct, both C and D are correct, but a better diagnosis for will be given by globin chain assay. Now, we will quickly have a look. What is a normal adult hemoglobin? Alpha 2, beta 2. That means 2 alpha chains paired with 2 beta chains, they are best friends forever, right? But in case of beta thalassemia, this beta chain would not be there, right? Alpha is to beta is normally 1:1. But in case of beta thalassemia, beta chains will be defective, so the ratio will increase. The ratio will increase in case of beta thalassemia, whereas in case of alpha thalassemia, alpha chains would not be there, okay? So what will happen to the ratio? It will decrease. That means it can help in the diagnosis of both alpha and beta thalassemia. This is number one advantage. And number two, it gives a definite diagnosis. A change in the ratio of alpha is to beta globin will give a better definitive diagnosis for thalassemia compared to HPLC, right? So answer will be globin chain assay. Next, the cause of target cells. We have already seen the variations in shape and size of RBCs, and here we see target cells. The typical target cell appearance we have already discussed. T for target cells, T for thalassemia. T for target cells, T for thalassemia. Is it only seen in thalassemia? No, it is also seen in other hemoglobinopathies, hemoglobin C disease and sickle cell anemia, but the most frequently asked is T for target cells, T for thalassemia. Why is it seen? It is seen due to increased surface area. Increased membrane or increased surface area to volume ratio will give the typical target appearance to the RBC. So answer will be increased membrane. Answer will be increased membrane. Most common finding of lung injury in a COVID patient. Now, if the question would have been most important or most common cause For lung injury, answer would have been endothelial injury. The cause would have been injury to the endothelium, but now they are asking you most common finding in case of a COVID patient in lung. Answer will be diffuse alveolar damage is the most common finding of lung injury in a COVID patient. So next question is, all are true about nodular lymphocyte predominant Hodgkin lymphoma except. So we'll quickly see the differences between classical Hodgkin lymphoma and NLPHL. So you have to remember, in a classical Hodgkin lymphoma, CD15 and 30 are positive, whereas in case of NLPHL, CD20, CD45 will be positive. It is EBV negative, but it has got the best prognosis. This was the main feature they have asked you a question on. So answer will be all are true except, okay. So it has got a poor prognosis? No, it has got a best prognosis. It is CD15, 30 negative, which would have been positive in a classical Hodgkin lymphoma patient. So yes, CD30 negative, but CD20 and 45 positive, it is EBV negative. So it has got a excellent prognosis, best prognosis, right? Moving on to the next, a surgeon has to perform surgery in an emergency. It is a very, very important point that the surgeon doesn't have time for many tests. He wants one single test for all the clotting factors, and fibrinolysis. Answer will be TEG, thromboelastography, right? If you simply remember the point that APTT is responsible to test intrinsic pathway, TT is responsible to test extrinsic pathway, bleeding time is responsible to check platelet count, and clotting time is also an obsolete test. So even with the rule out option, you could have answered option D, TEG, thromboelastography. What are the advantages of TEG? It can test intrinsic, extrinsic pathways, fibrinolysis, platelet function, as well as clot strength. So many things can be tested together with the help of TEG compared to the others, and you could have easily answered simply with the help of rule out option. Next, JAK2 mutation most commonly associated with, answer will be, if the answer would have been multiple answers correct, then it is associated with polycythemia vera, ET and PMF. But in case of polycythemia vera, it is around more than 95% cases will be positive for JAK2, whereas in ET and PMF only around 50% will be positive. So if I ask you most common association, it is with PCV, polycythemia vera. Other mutations in ET and PMF, PMLR and CALR. So answer will be most common association, one single answer will be polycythemia vera. Next, a female presented with increased TSH and a very low T4. Now, look at this question, what will be your diagnosis? Mostly you will confuse between these two options. In Graves' disease, it is a condition of hyperthyroidism. That means T4 and T3 will be high and TSH will be low, compared to Hashimoto's disease, where T4 and T3 are low and TSH is high. That is a hypothyroid state. So answer will be Hashimoto's disease. Increased TSH with a very low T4, answer will be Hashimoto's disease, because it is a hypothyroid state, whereas Graves' disease is a hyperthyroid state. So there will be an increase in T3 and T4, whereas decrease in the level of TSH. Next, about telomerase, all are true except. Now simply on the basis of the theoretical part, yes, telomerase is an enzyme. It is a reverse transcriptase which helps to maintain the ends of chromosomes or the length of the chromosome So yes, it is a reverse transcriptase. It is found only in eukaryotes. It does maintain the chromosome length, but it is not involved in DNA repair. What enzyme is involved in DNA repair? Answer will be helicase. Helicase is the enzyme involved in DNA repair. So all are true except DNA repair, which occurs with the help of DNA helicase enzyme. Next, which of the following proteins HPV vaccine targets? Now looking at the options, yes, it is, if the question would have been pathogenesis of HPV. pathogenesis of HPV, answer would have been E6, E7, but now they are asking about the vaccine target. So answer will be L1 capsid protein. L1 capsid protein. Now, HPV vaccine targets L1 capsid protein. Which vaccine? Gardasil vaccine, which contains constituents of L1 protein. But if the question would have been the pathogenesis of HPV depends on, answer would have been E6, E7. Next, a pathological gross specimen of a bone tumor at the lower end of femur in a 10-year-old child was given. The answer will be osteosarcoma. Answer will be osteosarcoma involving the distal end of femur, osteoblastic foci, okay, involving the metaphysis, but also invades the cortex and the surrounding soft tissue. It is a picture of osteosarcoma. Next, reticular fibers are not seen in the structural framework of, so we will see where the reticular fibers are found. Yes, they provide structural support, number 1, and easy to remember, reticular fibers, that means they are seen in reticuloendothelial system. So what are the sites? Liver, spleen, bone marrow, lymph node, but not in the thymus. And how does it look like? It looks like a, can you see these reticular black colored fibers? This provides the structural framework to the cells. So answer will be, they are not seen in which site? They are not seen in thymus, because these are the examples of reticuloendothelial system. Easy to remember, reticular fibers are seen in reticuloendothelial system, that means spleen, bone marrow, lymph nodes, but not in the thymus. Next, you have to identify the cells in the peripheral blood picture. It was a very simple question. We have done it multiple number of times and it is very easy to recognize the cell. Let me just zoom into the PBF. Peripheral blood film. Number 1, you can see these RBCs. You can see these RBCs which are anucleated and they have got a central 1/3 pallor. Due to difference in the thickness, there is a central 1/3 pallor in the RBCs. Number 2, you can see these small blue dot like structures which are the platelets. Number 3, you have to recognize the WBCs. Number 1, can you see this eosinophil? Can you see these orange reddish granules completely filling up the cytoplasm in a bilobed cell? It is an eosinophil. How will you recognize? With the help of reddish granules, right? Reddish orange granules. Number 2, basophil. Easy to remember, basophilic granules, blue color granules. They are coarse granules which will completely cover the nucleus. This is a basophil. Now, let me show you a neutrophil, okay, and then a monocyte. How will you recognize a monocyte? Kidney shaped nucleus. Kidney shaped nucleus is seen in case of a monocyte, and lymphocyte, you can see this condensed nucleus with a very scant amount of cytoplasm. This is lymphocyte, and the size of a normal small lymphocyte is similar to the size of the surrounding RBC. So this is a lymphocyte, this is kidney shaped nucleus in case of a monocyte. Basophils with the help of these basophilic granules completely covering up the nucleus, and the last is eosinophil due to eosinophilic granules. Easy to remember. So we'll quickly remember eosinophil, orange red granules, basophil, basophilic granules completely covering up the nucleus, monocyte kidney shaped nucleus, lymphocyte condensed nucleus with a scant amount of cytoplasm. And you can also use the size of the surrounding RBCs in order to compare the size of the lymphocyte. Next, loss of the marked cells can be associated with all except. Now, for that you have to first recognize the cell. So this was the cell which was marked. Let me just zoom into the cell. Can you see this beautiful pinkish cytoplasm? So can you remember P for pink and P for parietal cells? Compared to these chief cells, they have a more pinkish cytoplasm. So this was the cell which was marked. So this is P for pink and P for parietal cell. Now looking at the question, loss of parietal cells can be associated with all. Loss of parietal cells can be associated with all except. So answer will be simply on the basis of rule out option, Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. Why? Why? Because Zollinger-Ellison syndrome is associated with overactivation of acid producing cells and not their absence. Okay, so simply on the basis of rule out option, parietal cell loss will not be associated with Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. Now, PBF shows pancytopenia. All of the following can be the cause except. It was a very simple question, except. So, yes, hairy cell leukemia is associated with pancytopenia. MDS is associated with pancytopenia. Some cases of megaloblastic anemia show pancytopenia. In fact, it is a very important cause of pancytopenia, especially in developing countries where nutritional deficiency is there. So, answer will be APML. It will not be associated with pancytopenia out of these options, yes. Now, two important points you have to remember about APML. Best prognosis, because it has a very good response to treatment, okay. Fusion is PML-RARA fusion gene. Our rods are seen, maximum association with DIC, right. So, APML will be associated with increased TLC and not pancytopenia. So, students, two things we have learned from this INI-CT are, number one, revision is the key at this point of time, and clear basics is one important point you should always focus on.